Welcome to Commander Central, episode 330, and today we'll be taking a look at listener Kevin Ellis's Niv-Mizzet Reborn Voltron deck. I'm Dana.
And I'm Chris.
Christopher, how are you doing this fine Monday morning as we're recording this for a show that comes out on Thursday?
I'm doing well, I guess. I mean, can't complain too much.
I didn't do a whole lot exciting this weekend. My mother has a small RV she has purchased, and she went camping this weekend, and she had never hooked up any of the stuff on her RV, electrical, water, sewer, that kind of stuff. So I had to bust out my phone and some YouTube videos and figure out how to do all of that kind of on the fly at a campground. So that was exciting. And then figuring out how to unhook the sewer and empty out the tanks on the RV in the rain after she left as well. So
you
that was
just
not as bad as
I could have told you how to do it.
It wasn't too bad once I got some videos out, but I didn't need to be doing it in the rain. That wasn't ideal. And my son's out there with me, and he's like, "So how do you have to empty the sewer tank out?" I'm like, "Well, what you do is you have to just get underneath the RV, and there's a valve you flip, and then it just drains out. But you have to roll out of the way really quick." So I'm like, "Why don't you get under there?" And he's like, "What?" His eyes get all big, yeah, just make sure you roll uphill, because if you roll downhill, it's not going to do you any good.
What are you doing?
Eventually, after a couple seconds of thinking, he's like, "That can't be how that works." No, that's not how that works. So we got it figured out. It was not nearly as bad as I had thought it might be. So
no,
we
it's really
took care
not
of it for her. Yeah, and I think I've showed her successfully how to do it herself for future use as well.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way, to be honest. But that was about the level of excitement I had this weekend. Not much else too awful going on. Max called me last night and he wanted to know if I want to get a drink, but I just didn't have a chance. I had too much going on, so I didn't get a chance to go see him. But he did stop in the shop on Tuesday didn't play any games, but he stopped in for 10 minutes just to BS. So I need to get some games in with him because I have not played with him for a while.
I haven't played with either of you guys in quite a while, so
we'll have to do something on a weekend. Just be like, "Hey, let's get together at Max's house and play a couple games here at some point coming up."
Right, I agree.
For sure.
No, my weekend was interesting, I guess. I decided that I am now a Pokemon tournament grinder. And I went to a Pokemon tournament, and I top 8'd my first Pokemon tournament, and I'm like, oh boy, here we go.
You're giving up Modern for Pokemon?
Modern it's become stale and kind of boring, and everyone's RCQ grinding. And
sure.
With all my medical stuff, I can't do the RCQ grind with them.
Yeah,
so I'm
yeah.
just like, well, I'll do Pokemon tournaments then.
Yeah, why not?
Right?
It's good to shake things up, get a fresh start on things for fresh perspective as well. So.
Oh, yeah, because I usually judge that, because I'm a judge for Pokemon.
Yeah.
So I sat down to play, and they're like, "You're playing?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, judges can play too."
Nice. So is it as challenging as something like Modern?
Yes. It's definitely more of a fast-paced.
Okay.
You got to think on the fly. It's very the best way I can describe it is kind of like playing solitaire, because you have no interaction on what your opponent's doing. You
really?
Just
okay.
Let them play, and then you play your turn, but you got to try to beat what they did on their turn, type of thing. So
because there's no instant speed stuff, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's just straight up. You're trying to. It's like building a Voltron deck almost, where you Voltron up your guy to try to become stronger and more powerful than their guy, and then you're trading pieces on the board like chess, and it's definitely a different take on a game.
Okay. And is it? I hear Pokemon. I always assume kids, but is it? That's probably not necessarily accurate. Is there a lot of adults that are there playing?
Yes. I didn't see a single kid that came in for the tournament.
Oh, wow.
It was all adults, a little bit younger than me, up to my age. So I mean, there wasn't anyone that was older than me, I don't think, anyways, that I recognized. But a lot of guys came actually from Minnesota down to play. So
nice. I guess I will quick throw this out there. This is not something that you don't really not know, but I was digging through stuff this weekend. I'm like, I got a couple boxes of old bulk I should go through, finally get rid of some of this stuff. And so I grabbed one. I'm like, okay. And it was like a carton of paper carton or something from an office. So there was maybe, I don't know, 5,000 cards, 10,000 cards in there, somewhere there. And I'm like, okay, well, I was gonna watch the new Predator movie, the Prey movie on Hulu.
Oh, good movie.
Yeah, it was quite good. So I'm like, I might as well, I'll do something while I'm watching it. So I grabbed my laptop, I started flipping through those cards. cards. And this was bulk I'd picked through before a couple of years back. I'm like, I might as well give it a once over in case there's like a Chain of Smog or a couple of those things in there. And I didn't hit any Chains of Smog, but like there was a 3-color wall for, I forget the name of the card even now, back old border that like reduces the cost of your blue and green spells, I think, and it's a white wall.
Oh,
so
yes.
it gets played in Arcades decks.
Yep.
But it was like a $2 card I was getting for trade-in value from Card Kingdom on that, and there was like 14 of them in there.
Oh, wow.
So like there was I hit a handful of those kind of things and just flipping through the bulk. I didn't. There's some cards obviously like, oh, this vanilla goblin is not going to be worth anything, so you don't bother to check. But there was enough things that even I didn't know were worth anything, and I think I finished with like almost $200 worth of store credit from Card Kingdom on bulk that I'd already picked through a couple years back. So, for something to do while you're watching a movie, if you've got boxes of old bulk and stuff that you've set aside and just haven't gone through in years, if you're doing something else, not a bad idea to give it another go through and see if you can find a little bit, nickels and dimes and quarters add up pretty quick in those situations. So I did do that this weekend too and picked up some Card Kingdom trade-in stock I'm going to send off and have a little bit of credit for the next deck I build. So.
Yeah, see, I'm the other way around. I don't have, like, bulk sitting around. I have a bunch of sealed product just sitting there, and I look at it, and I'm like, I know there's a Fierce Guardianship in that deck, and there's a Deflecting Slot in that deck, and I'm like, I just don't want to open these.
Yeah, I should. That's the next thing I probably should do is look back. I'm like, why am I still holding on to, these 3 sealed Commander decks from Commander 2014 or something? Like, I clearly have determined I'm not going to open that. I should maybe get rid of it or something, or trade it for something I need. So I might do a few of those things at some point here too. Okay, so should we jump into taking a look at Kevin's deck here?
Sure.
So Max has a list of questions that he sends out even though he's not here today like a slacker. And the first thing Max asks is what is your meta like? And Kevin says, I play in a variety of metas with a range of power levels from pre-con all the way to CEDH. Games are generally at his LGS and a variety of online spell table metas and a couple of communities and a couple of online streams here or there. This deck's power level is mid to high. It's looking to start and take a strong board presence around turn 4 or 5.
That's pretty good. So we also ask, what is the goal of the deck? And we were told that the goal of the deck is to get the companion, which is Gigantha, into play and use them to cast Niv-Mizzet Reborn. After drawing several cards off of Niv-Mizzet's ETB, Niv becomes your Voltron target, mostly consisting of a cycle of the 2-color auras from Shadowmoor and Eventide. So those would be the hybrid ones, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yep. It also gives you additional mana generated by untapping and tapping Gigantha. So I'm assuming there's probably like Kyora's Follower or some of that random stuff in there to untap stuff.
Exactly.
Niv then goes around the table attacking people to get lethal commander damage. A strength of the deck is if Niv gets removed, then you recast Niv and it refills your hand so the deck can replay him and keep on going. The deck has a couple of backup strategies of 2 secondary Voltron targets and a go-wide token strategy.
So there's plans upon plans. That's always good. We ask, what are the weaknesses or areas it should focus on? The deck can get stalled if Gigantha gets removed before the deck can cast Niv-Mizzet. Most of the creature recursion in the deck is to get Gigantha back, but none of them can pull from exile. Another weakness is if Niv gets neutralized by something that isn't removal, such as Song of the Dryads or Obliute, it's tough to deal with it. The deck is likely light on lands, but I've tried to combat this by adding cards that can loot or draw early game and the look for land drops. I will let you guys determine if you agree with me or not regarding the land thing. Lastly, the deck can fold to hard control decks. This happens by, after playing Niv a few times, the deck can just run out of impactful cards to draw. He's not sure if this is an issue the deck can actually address or if it's just a thing you're going to have to accept.
Yeah. This he also says this is definitely a recent issue and is testing emergency powers to see if it helps. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to immediately say something on this. Sometimes there are just decks that you just fold to. There's just nothing you can do about it. And that might actually just be the case. But whenever I play a commander, like an actual real commander, I don't think I've ever really seen hard control decks because you can't really win with hard control decks.
I tend to agree.
Now, like a basic, couple counter spells thrown into a deck or something I can see, but like hard control I've never really seen.
Aside from like a Baral deck where they're trying to just control down to a combo, it just doesn't, it's far, you don't encounter it that much.
Yes. But he did say that he does play in some CDH games, so that could be a thing.
Yep.
We also ask too, like what's a budget for a single card or card upgrades? Because we don't want to be, telling you, get like a moat or something and jam it in there or whatever. So the budget, no budget restrictions, but a high cost card should be powerful enough to warrant its inclusion. A good example of that is like OG duels. They don't bring enough to the table for their price tag.
Yeah.
$300 a piece. I completely agree with that, especially in a 5-color deck. So bonus information on this. There are 10 guilds are perfectly color balanced, 6 of each guild, and it is part of the deck's identity/restriction. The deck can deviate from it, but it should be for a very strong reason. So, I mean, I found this a little bit hard when I was going through that, but we'll see where we go from there.
Yep.
We were also told that this deck was inspired from episode 278, which was For Your Consideration Voltron. So this is a Voltron deck, so we'll see what we can do with this.
5-color Voltron. I like it. And, so first of all, thanks for showing us this deck, Kevin. We talked about this a little bit off mic. This is just between the restrictions on the Gigantha requires, the restrictions Niv-Mizzet requires, the baked-in restrictions about keeping the guilds balanced and things like that. This was a tricky deck to come up with suggestions for, at least for me. But it's also a super neat deck. So I think we're probably going to, this is, at least coming from me, is going to be a little bit more of a show and tell than it is offering suggestions, although I do have a couple.
Yeah, I have a couple as well. I didn't really have anything to cut per se, because I didn't really go deep into like the exact numbers of the cards. But this is something that you can look at when I give you a suggestion. Be like, okay, can I look at this guild and see if this card is actually better than one of the other ones I have?
Yeah. So first thing, as a reminder, Niv-Mizzet Reborn is a 5-color commander, 1 of each pip, so 5 mana, 6/6 for a dragon avatar. It has flying. That says whenever Niv-Mizzet enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library, and for each color pair, choose a card that's exactly those colors from among them, and put the chosen cards into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, I mean, conceivably, you could draw 10 cards off that, right? If you drew 1 of each guild color, the odds of that are super, super low. You're going to hit a few lands, you're going to hit a few overlaps, but like in this deck with the guild color pairings kind of balanced, actually, you probably are pretty consistently hitting, 4 to 6 easily cards off a cast. That's pretty good.
Unless you hit a land clump or something.
Right, yeah.
Like
so that's real solid. So let's look at the land base here. 33 lands only in the deck.
I'm going to immediately say that's low, especially in 5 colors.
I feel like it's low too. I don't know what you're going to necessarily cut for it, but that in a 5-color deck, that feels low. That said, there's a good amount of fetching here. Arid Mesa, Bloodstained Mire, Flooded Strand. There's a Marsh Flats, Misty Rainforest. I think every single good fetch land is in here, all 10. Every shock land is in here, and at least 5 triomes. I don't think the new ones are in here from New Capenna.
It doesn't look like it.
Could be mistaken. Yeah, they don't seem to be in here. So getting your colors probably isn't too terrible. You can crack, a couple of those fetches and go grab a couple triomes and shocks if you don't need it. And you probably can hit 5 colors, at least the option to cast 5 colors pretty easily, which then gets you to Gigantha, which then gets you to Niv. And you don't even necessarily maybe even need Gigantha after, turn 7 or 8. At that point, your color balancing is probably pretty good, and you can recast Niv, although Gigantha tapping for 5 mana and untapping with a couple of the creatures, as you mentioned, is probably super, super good. That is just a really good land base, but beyond the triomes and the fetches and the shocks, there are things like the filter lands from way back in Lorwyn, which, you put 1 mana into it and get some combination of colors back out. Command Tower, obviously, is in here, makes any kind of color you want. I think 33 is low. Again, I don't know what I would pull, but man, that feels low. And I don't necessarily love the filter lands either.
No.
You need for example, Mystic Gate. You need a white or a blue, and you get back white or blue, and it maybe changes your color combinations a little bit, but like in a deck like this, I feel like the odds of you needing to turn a blue into 2 blues or something, I feel like you'd be better off with the Mana Confluence, City of Brass, Exotic Orchard type lands that probably make you 3 or 4 or 5 colors in the case of Confluence, City of Brass every time. But Exotic Orchard's going to make you probably 3 of the colors you need really, really easily, if not 4 or 5.
Yes.
I think I like those more than those filter lands.
I agree. The other one that I had on there, so you did Exotic Orchard, Mana Confluence, City of Brass. I had the World Tree. Just for the simple fact, if you have 6 lands plus the World Tree, all your lands tap for any color. So that just mana fixes immediately right there. Plus, it is a green source, and green is usually the number 1 color in 5-color decks because usually you're running ramp spells. Now, while this deck is not your typical 5-color deck, green still seems to be pretty prevalent, especially with Giganta needing to cast Giganta, and green is one of the pips in Giganta. So
exactly, it's going to make that green mana that you need. I mean, you can't cast Giganta anyway until you're at 5 lands. There's not a ton of artifacts that get you there in this deck anyway. Yep. Yeah, World Tree, I think, is the fixing it provides is so useful.
Yep. I would also suggest trying to get more basics in here. I noticed immediately there's one basic in here, and it's a forest. And if you don't hit removal, you're just going to get Blood Moon locked out of the game, which is quite unfortunate. I mean, you can cast Giganta, but if they kill Giganta, then you got to try to, get it back to recast it or something. So.
And like I said, maybe that's a situation where you're like, you know what, if I get Blood Moon, does having 1 or 2 basics help me? Probably not that much, so screw it. Maybe I'm just going to not worry about it and just accept that I'm going to die once in a while to a Blood Moon. Yeah, I get that logic too sometimes. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. You're like, okay, I can put 5 basics in, but what are the odds that I have one of them out and have access to one of those removal spells when they Blood Moon me low, so screw it, who cares? So I do get that logic somewhat as well.
And that is why I run Blood Moon in all my red decks. Exactly. Because of people's logic like that.
Yeah. Another one I'll just quick point out, Manamo School at Water's Edge is land from the first Kamigawa block, and it taps for blue, doesn't come into play tapped, and you can use it to untap target legendary permanent. Basically, it's a way to untap Giganta to tap Giganta again and make more mana. Yep. But it also, you use it to make Niv-Mizzet to basically give it vigilance. Like, there's a lot of utility for that card. I am a big fan of Manamo. This deck, it doesn't matter, but, like, there's a lot of it doesn't say legendary creature, it says legendary permanent. So, like, if you happen to have a, Guy's Cradle out or a Nykthos or something, neither of which are in this deck, but just in general, I do think Manamo is kind of underappreciated. That card is fantastic.
Yes.
Okay, lands, that's really all I've got. Anything else from you there, Chris?
No. Lands it's pretty straightforward in a 5-color deck, which you need to do.
Now, there are 8 Planeswalkers here, so let's take a look at those, Chris. Who are the Planeswalkers in this deck?
We have Kiora, Master of Depths, Oko, Thief of Crowns, Sarkhan Vol, Sarkhan the Mad, oh boy, Tamiyo, the Completed Sage, Teferi, who slows the sunset, the Royal Scions, and Renin 6.
So, it's not a Planeswalker deck, but 8 Planeswalkers is a lot of Planeswalkers.
Right.
And they're all, again, color paired match. So you can, I guess Tamiyo technically kind of looks weird because there's the hybrid mana, but it's still a 2-color commander. Yep. A lot of them have some draw stapled on. So like Sarkhan the Mad, I was like, oh, that's a strange one to have in here. But
that's what I thought too.
It's got a zero, right. It's got a 0 to get a card draw out of it. So basically, it's a Planeswalker you can draw with Niv-Mizzet, and you can use it. Phyrexian Arena doesn't do you any good. Risk Society doesn't do any good if you draw those off of your commander. But the Planeswalkers do. So I think a lot of them are basically like draw effects on a 2-color body that can be hit with Niv-Mizzet.
Yes.
And there's a few untap kind of effects here as well. Like Kiora untaps as well. So like Kiora is something that you can use to untap Giganta with the ability. So it's just, they're all, none of them are like generically useful Planeswalkers. Really, they're all Planeswalkers that work with what the deck wants to do.
Yes, and they work sense. Into the theory of what the deck wants to do.
Exactly. There's nothing there worth me even suggesting to take out or point out. Is there anything that jumps out at you there before we move on?
Not to take out, the one card that I always would suggest if I'm going to play, like 8 Planeswalkers is a lot. So if I'm going to play Planeswalkers, I definitely want to be playing the Ashiok from
War of the Spark.
I was trying to think. It was one of the new Ravnica sets. The one that exiles your opponent's graveyards. Just because exiling graveyards is so powerful. And if I already have Planeswalker package somewhat in the deck, I might as well have that one in there.
Yeah, Ashiok's so good. And again, hits your 2-color thing as well. So it's hittable off of the Niv-Mizzet strike. So, yeah.
Yes.
Again, I will briefly touch on artifacts before we move on to talk about something else. There's only 2 artifacts in the deck, a Soul Ring and a Conqueror's Flail. Soul Ring, because it's Soul Ring. Conqueror's Flail is an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control. So it's going to give Niv-Mizzet +5/+5, basically when it's equipped there. And as long as it's attached to a creature, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn.
Yes.
So it's also going to prevent them from interacting with Niv when you're like going for a Voltron Alpha Strike.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a bunch of things you could, like, hey, you can add a bunch of mana rocks or something to this deck, but, like, it's just so packed. You don't hit mana rocks off of Niv-Mizzet's cast anyway.
But you do. There are some.
There are a couple. Yeah,
I think there's 5 of them that you could play in here.
From Alara, I believe. Is that where that cycle was from?
Yeah, the boulder posts or whatever.
Yes, the border posts all have different names. There's a cycle of 5 of them from back in Alara. I don't think they're probably good enough to run, but technically if you wanted to, you could do that.
This would be the deck to run them into.
This would be the deck, absolutely. If you wanted to run those, this would be the place to do it.
Yep. My only suggestion that I saw, and people are gonna yell at me for this one, but I would cut the Soul Ring, and I would rather be playing a Chromatic Lantern over it. Just to mana fix everything.
Sure. Just for the perfect fixing.
Yep, because you're so much hard in colors and you're not really in colorless at all. So I don't really see the purpose of Soul Ring. Aside from getting Gigantha out faster if you get it early, but that's the only thing I'm really seeing with that, and I'd rather have the color fixing over the extra pips.
Yeah, it's tough to pull Soul Ring power-wise, even in situations like that. So I get it, but and maybe the color fix, and maybe there's enough between the fetch lands and the triumphs and shocks that isn't a problem either.
Well, the upside to that too is that with Chromatic Lantern, you can play a shock land and still tap it for mana.
Right,
or not a shock land, but a fetch land.
Yep. Right, if you get to that point in the game where like you're a little bit low in life, or somebody has something preventing you from searching or whatever, or you just need the land to be able to like be used immediately and not come into play tapped.
Yep.
Like if you're going to go get a Triome or something, you can do that. Yeah. I don't think Soul Ring's ever wrong necessarily in a deck for the most part, but I understand that logic for sure.
Yes.
So let's go over, there's another small category here. Sorceries, there's not a ton of them. We have Discover and Dispersal. The Discover half of that lets you Surveil for 2, then draw a card. The Dispersal half, each opponent returns a non-land permanent they control with the highest converted mana cost among permanents they control to the owner's hand. Then they discard a card. So again, it's a Dimir effect that gets hit with Niv-Mizzet that also can draw a card. Expressive Iteration will be the Izzet card draw spell they have in here among sorceries. Last one standing, Rakdos colors, choose a creature at random, then destroy the rest. So it's a board wipe, and again, it's hittable with Niv-Mizzet. Merciless Eviction, board wipe, hittable with Niv-Mizzet. Notion Rain, card draw spell in Dimir colors. Revival Experiment, 4 and a black and a green, 6 mana total. So this will be one of Golgari spells in the deck. For each permanent type, return up to 1 card of that type from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you lose 3 life for each card returned this way. So you could potentially hit quite a few cards off Revival Experiment. 6 mana is a lot, and there's not that many permanents in this deck, but there's enough. So I'm curious to see how well that works. I'd like to hear the feedback. I could see it's either going to be a bomb or it's going to whiff.
Yep.
But when it works, it's going to really, really work. And the last one is Safe Right Quest. That's a sorcery from back in the Lorwyn block. Search your library for a forest or plains card, reveal it, and put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. So it's not the best version of that effect, but it's a 2-color version of that effect. So again, you can hit it off Niv-Mizzet.
Yep, and it's 1 mana. So I mean,
exactly.
And when I saw the 1 of Basic Forest in the deck, I was like, why is there just 1 of Basic Forest? And then I saw Safe Right Quest, and I'm like, well, There we go.
Exactly. Again, just it's like digging deep for spells that don't see a ton of play. Revival Experiment, Safe Right Quest, Last One Standing even. Some of these cards are obvious, like Expressive Iteration sees legacy play. That's how good that card is. I love Notion Rain, but a couple of those cards are cards like I don't even know if I've ever even seen Safe Right Quest before. Like seen it just in general, let alone seen it in a deck. So that's super cool to see like some of these cards that are in here because they hit the color balance and make sense in this deck.
Yeah, the color balance was what was hard because there's other cards that I would play. There's like a Bring to Light. There was a
Bring to Light would be really good in this deck.
Yep. There's a Dimir card. I can't remember the name of it, but I do believe it reads an opponent mills 2 cards and you draw 2 cards. Because I know I play that in my
Yes.
mill deck. So cards like that, but that, then it starts affecting the actual color pie that he has built in this deck.
Right.
So
Yeah, if you have to pull that, in like the Dimir Mill draw one, you could definitely pull the Discover Dispersal portion of that if you wanted to.
Yep.
So there's some maybe easy 1-to-1 trades, but yeah, that's where things get super tricky. It's like, okay, if I want to leave this one color pair in, I have to remove that one color pair, and that gets tough.
Yep. For the revival experiment, if that doesn't work the way that you want it to, like if you're only getting like one card back, maybe 2 cards at the most, I would suggest thinking about maybe using Treasured Find.
That's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
Yep, it's 2 mana. It's still in the Golgari, but it lets you take any card back. So, I mean, yes, it gets exiled, but you don't really care at that point.
Right.
Because you get any card back that you need. So,
and Revival Experiment doesn't do you any good. Doesn't do any good with your instant and sorcery spells. And there are 15 instants and 7 sorceries here. So being able to use that Treasured Find to get one of those back to it, a key portion of the game, it's a cheaper thing to cast. Yeah, it gets less stuff, but there's always going to be a target. Whereas Revival Experiment, like there's probably situations where you draw that and you're like, oh, that's 6 mana to get one thing back. That doesn't feel very good. Yeah. Whereas the Treasured Find, you can always get something.
Agreed.
All right, Chris, what are you going to talk about next? Should we do those instants since there's only 15 of those?
Yeah, let's do the instants. So, as Dana said, there are 15 of these. So we got a Boros Charm, Counter Squall, Dimir Charm, Dovin's Veto, Drown in the Lock, Emergency Powers. Wow, that's 7 mana. Holy cow. What does that card do? So this card reads, each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards. Exile Emergency Powers. It also has Addendum. So if you cast a spell during your main phase, you may put a permanent card with converted mana cost 7 or less from your hand onto the battlefield. Not bad card. Not bad card at all.
Yeah, it does cost 7, but like you kind of refund a chunk of that by playing, a 4 mana Planeswalker for free or dropping one of your creatures or something for free. So like, yeah, it's 7 mana, but it doesn't really kind of cost you 7 because you're going to get a, massive refund back on the next thing you put into play for free.
Agreed. Next we have Faithful Mending, Fracture, Izzet Charm, Kolaghan's Command, Magma Opus, another massively costed spell, Prismari Command, Vanishing Verse. I'm assuming this is a Wear Tear. If sure is a Wear Tear. Darn Architect, every time you click on it, like it moves, and I'm like, hey, come back. And then the last one on here is Wrecking Ball. Oh, I love Wrecking Ball. I've never been able to get it to fit in a deck, but I love the card.
Another card, I found a bunch of Wrecking Balls when I was going through that bulk this weekend that I found and sent them off to Card Kingdom. So, and again, we're looking at a bunch of, like, there's a ton of competition among, like, Fracture is one of the Orzhov removal spells. Well, there's a ton of options there. You could very easily have Vindicate in that slot or Utter End or Anguish Unmaking or something. So, a lot of competition there. Counter spells, you're trying to run things like Counter Squall, so you have a 2-color counter spell you can hit off Niv-Mizzet. Dimir Charm has a counter spell function baked into it as well. So just a lot of charms and a lot of things that do, multiple different things here. The one suggestion I had, and I don't know which Boros card you would pull if you wanted to keep the balance, particularly because this is a Voltron deck. There's literally one spell that you can use that's multicolored to give your creatures double strike, and that's Double Cleave. Ooh. Target creature gains double strike till end of turn, and it's 1 and a hybrid Boros, so, 1 in a red or 1 in a white. In a Niv-Mizzet deck where he's already 6, and you're probably going to have like 1 or 2 enchantments on him, it's very easy to get him up to 11, and being able to double strike and just one-shot somebody is really, really useful.
I wonder if it's worth it to pull the Wear Tear, seeing how there's not a whole lot of targeted removal in this deck.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe just changing up the theory of it as, okay, we'll just sacrifice a little bit of the removal to just use player removal instead.
Yeah, could be. Because looking at the Boros cards, I was having a tough time figuring out what I would pull to replace it with. We haven't got to the creatures yet, but General Ferris, Rockrick makes a lot of sense in this deck. Something like Legion's Initiative, we haven't got to enchantments yet, but like the ability to both buff and blink. Yep. Niv-Mizzet to get that trigger again is really, really, and protect him is really, really good. Like, there's just a lot of, I don't know what I would pull. Boros Charm also gains double strike. So like that's the other option, and that's already in the deck. So I don't know what I would pull, but yeah, the balance thing is very, very tricky.
Agreed.
Any other things in among the instants, dear Chris?
So instance I had, so there's Growth Spiral, which is a card that I would discuss. Card draw, being able to play another land, that fun jazz. Assassin's Trophy, just probably the best removal spell in its colors.
Yep.
And then Turn to Mist. Turn to Mist is a 1 and a hybrid blue and a white, and this is a blink spell, pretty much. It's literally, you exile creature, then return to the battlefield, that kind of fun jazz. So another protection spell within those colors, but the cool thing about that is if Niv-Mizzet's not suited up, you just blink it and you get another X amount of cards.
Right,
because it's an ETB effect. So, I mean, that ability just seems broken to me, so I would definitely be trying to do some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's a good call there. I wasn't even thinking about Growth Spiral. I don't know why. That card was so busted in Standard, too.
Yeah, it was the first thing that popped in my head. I'm like, is there a Growth Spiral in here? And I'm looking, and I'm like, sure isn't. I would definitely look at that one.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Yeah. Their restrictions are just so weird, but I like this deck a lot. That's super cool.
I do, too.
Yeah. All right, you know what? I mentioned enchantments. I'm going to go up and look at the enchantments now, because that's how you're killing people here. Armadillo Cloak is one of the Swesney enchantments. Creature gets +2/+2 trample, and whenever it deals damage, you gain that much life. That's particularly noteworthy there because that's not lifelink.
Sure isn't.
So if you have something with lifelink, it stacks, and that will matter later on because there's also an Unflinching Courage in here, which is the same thing, except it has lifelink. So those two cards actually do, in fact, stack, which is actually pretty cool. Cult of the Dominus, another aura. As long as the enchanted creature is blue, it gets +1/+1 and has Shroud. And if it's red, it has a +1/+1 and has haste. You've got Edge of Divinity is the Orzhov version of that enchantment. As long as it's white, it gets +1/+2. And as long as it's black, it's +2/+1. So in this case, it's just a 1-mana spell that gives Niv-Mizzet +3/+3. That's fantastic. Favor of the Overbeing, Simic version. It's 1 in Simic. If it's green, it gets +1/+1 in Vig. If it's blue, it gets +1/+1 in Flying. The Flying doesn't help, but it's again 2-mana spell to give Niv-Mizzet +2/+2 in Vigilance. You can also use another creature, I guess, if you absolutely need to, and that was one of the things that was mentioned. You have backup Voltron creatures here. Fist of the Demigod, +1/+1 if it's black, +1/+1 if it's red, and it also gives Wither and First Strike. Gift of the Deity. This one's quite a bit more expensive. It's 4 and a black. Gives creature +1/+1 for both of those colors, and it gives Death Touch, and it gives Lure. So all creatures able to block it do so. Helm of the Ghast Lord is the Dimir version. So going to give your creature +2/+2, 1 for each of those two colors. When it deals damage to an opponent, draw a card, and when it deals damage to an opponent, that player discards a card. Really, really powerful. Journey to Eternity. When a enchanted creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control and transform Journey to Eternity. Legion's Initiative, which we just briefly mentioned. It's a Boros enchantment. It's not an aura, but it gives red creatures you control +1/+0 and white creatures +0/+1. So it's going to buff Niv-Mizzet. It also has an activated ability for a red and a white. You exile it and exile all creatures you control. And at the beginning of the next combat, they come back into play with haste. So it's something you can do to protect your stuff from a board wipe if you need to for 2 mana. And it's also going to reproc that Niv-Mizzet ETB ability.
Yep. Now, the picture on that art of that card, is that Niv-Mizzet? Because it sure looks like it.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Also fits as well. Riot Spikes. Enchanted creature gets +2/-1, but it's a 1-mana buff for Niv-Mizzet. The -1's kind of meaningless.
Yep.
Runes of the Deuce is the Gruul version of this. Creature has +1/+1 in Double Strike and +1/+1 in Trample. Both things that are super useful here. Scourge of the Noblesse is the Boros version of this. If it's red, it gets +1/+1 and has basically Boros mana to give it kind of fire breathing, +1/+0. And as long as it's white, it gets +1/+1 and has lifelink. Shield of the Oversoul gives your creature indestructible and flying and +2/+2 since it's going to be both of those colors. Showdown of the Skalds is a saga. The first mode exiles the top 4 cards of your library until end of turn. You may play those cards, so it's a kind of a draw spell. Again, it's going to hit 2 colors, which is useful here. And then the last 2 modes, whenever you cast a spell this turn, put a +1 counter on target creature you control.
That's pretty gross.
Steel of the Godhead, Azorius version of one of those auras from back in Lorwyn. If it's white, it gets lifelink. If it's blue, it gets unblockable. So being able to slam through and didn't deal additional damage with Niv-Mizzet unblockable seems pretty solid. We mentioned Unflinching Courage. And last is Widespread Thieving. It's the enchantment with Hideaway from New Capenna. Technically, the card is only 1 color. It's red. So you won't draw it off Niv-Mizzet, but the reason it's in here is whenever you cast a multicolor spell, you make a treasure, so almost every other spell is multicolor.
Yep.
And you can spend Wooburg, and if you do, you can play the card that you exile with the Hideaway on it without paying its mana cost. So, I mean, that's just a really, really good piece of value in this deck.
Yeah, I definitely think it's in here for the treasures. I'm not sure if the Hideaway is actually worth it, because there's not really any huge bombs per se. You know, like there's the two of them that I discussed earlier in the instance, but other than that, there's nothing massive.
But hey, why not have the free card off it too? It's, you know, it's not no downside to it really. So I like all of these. I like using all of those Lorwyn auras to buff up your 5-color commander. The only one I'm a little bit, well, there's two of them I'm a little bit unsure of. I don't know really what I would replace them with, but the first one is Cloud of the Dominus, and it gives your creature Shroud.
Yes.
The problem with that is then you can't put any more of your auras on Niv-Mizzet.
Yeah, that is a problem. I can't think of anything to replace it with neither. It's definitely something that you're going to not cast right away, I guess. Or if you do cast it right away, you're just going to sit with everything else in your hand and maybe suit up something else.
Yeah, it's one of those things like, okay, if you draw 3 or 4 cards and you're like, okay, I'm going to put 3 enchantments on it first, and then I will put Cloud of the Dominus on. Well, then you have the problem where the Shroud that you're putting on, even if you're putting on last, what doesn't matter, then people, you've already suited up Niv-Mizzet with like 3 or 4 things, and then people can respond to your attempt to cast Cult by removing Niv-Mizzet.
Yep.
So the Shroud almost like, not only is it something you have to fight against, but because you're fighting against it, it makes it so it is actually less effective for your opponents to protect against your opponent's stuff too. On the other hand, the spell's it's only 1 mana, so like it's super efficient.
It's really hard to cut.
But man, I bet that burns you at times.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I've been burned by, like playing Whisper Silk Cloak and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
It's just like, no.
The other one I don't necessarily love is Gift of the Deity. That's the Golgari one. And number 1, it's 5 mana. Creature has Death Touch. Well, Niv-Mizzet's going to kill everything that blocks it anyway, because, I mean, even if it only has 1 aura on it, Gift of the Deity, it's a 6/6 then at that point. Or excuse me, it's an 8/8 at that point.
Yep.
It's going to kill whatever it blocks 95% of the time anyway. And the lure effect on it, because Niv has flying, is also going to not work on a bunch of stuff. So it's 5 mana to a lot of times just give your creature +2/+2. That doesn't seem very good.
Yeah, I understand why it's in here because you're playing the full set.
Absolutely.
Of them. But
honestly, I feel like we talked about Treasured Find as being a possible replacement for Five Experiment. I wonder if you just would be better off with Treasured Find in this slot, maybe, if you wanted to keep the balance.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I would first do a deep dive into auras and see if there is a better aura within the Golgari colors, because there's just got to be something or another. So what I was thinking that you could do with something like this is you could cut those cards, put in a different aura that's, say it's in a different guild, but then if you want to keep the color combinations, equal, you start cutting the different color combinations off of other cards.
Yeah, it wouldn't have to be a 1-for-1. You could pull that and replace it with an Azorius card, and then pull a different Azorius card somewhere else and put something else in there. Yeah.
Yeah, something else that could be weaker, It's all about tweaking it, tuning it. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be perfect on the curve neither, because, I mean,
exactly,
the chances of hitting all the cards that you need right away is very slim.
Well, last but not least, Chris, let's take a look at what the creatures are on the deck.
All right, we have 17 creatures. We have a Black Market Tycoon, which is a 2/2 from New Capenna that creates tokens, and then you take damage for each treasures they create, and then you take damage for each treasure that you control. Interesting card. We have a Bloom Tender, which is a monocolored card. We have Brina the Demogorg, right?
Yep,
Demigog,
so.
Something like that. Wow, I can't, pronounce anything today, apparently. We have a Chromanticore, Deathrite Shaman, Feyburrow Elder, General, this is not how it's pronounced, but it's General Ferocious to me.
Yes.
He creates tokens when you cast a multicolor spell. Very powerful card, 3/1. I mean, amazing card in this deck. We have Kyora's Follower, Llanowar Dead, Priest of the Fellrights, Radha, Heir to Keld, Ramos Dragon Engine, Root Coil Creeper, Samut, Voice of Dissent, Skull Prophet, Sovereigns of Lost Alara, and Steward of Valerian. It looks like a couple of these are just mana creatures overall. Like, see, we got the Steward, we got Llanowar Dead, I do believe is a mana creature. Yep. Feyburrow Elder. So, I mean, we got some mana dorks in here doing some fun, fancy stuff. Chromanticore and Ramos are both, from what it looks like to me, your other targets for doing your wacky Voltron stuff. So, I mean, that's definitely worth it. And then a couple of the other ones, just seem like they're good overall utility creatures.
Yeah, this is, I think, where, like, for the most part, you were seeing some things like, well, I need one more Golgari thing, so, hey, Llanowar Dead is at least a mana dork.
Yep.
And, hey, nothing wrong with 2-mana mana dork, too. It's a 2/2. It doesn't, die super easily. It's going to help you get there, get your creature out a little bit faster.
It's also going to help if, like, Niv-Mizzet gets killed, so you hit it off of Niv-Mizzet. Say Niv-Mizzet gets killed around the board before it comes up to you again. It's like, okay, well, now I got these mana dorks. I play them out. Then I can cast Niv-Mizzet again and go from there.
I will note, so Chromanticore isn't something that's going to get hit off Niv-Mizzet. It's one of the few ones that don't here as well. Yep. But hey, it's one of those things like any excuse, any deck that can run Chromanticore, why not? That's a cool card.
Yeah, let's just bestow Niv-Mizzet with Chromanticore too.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's fun. So I'm into that as well. This is there's for the most part none of these like really stand out as being anything particularly amazing because like we said, it's just like we're gonna need to put a few mana dorks and things in here to round out the deck. I will point out Feyburrow Elder, another great spot for that.
Yes.
It gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control. So if Niv's out, it's a 5/5 immediately, and it's gonna tap for 5 mana as well. It's a nice kind of backup Giganta. So, yeah, there's a lot of cards that you're like, that you don't see very often, and they wind up, you're like, oh, that card is just perfect in this deck.
Yes, I was like surprised. I was looking through the creatures, and I'm like, these aren't like phenomenal creatures that I could think of, a dozen better ones in the colors that I could hit off Niv-Mizzet. And then I think about it harder, and I'm like, these are just straight up utility to help for the Voltron theme. And I was like, I like that that's where the mindset went when this deck was built.
Yeah, they're creatures you're like, what is Skull Prophet? I don't even remember that card existing. You're like, oh,
right.
Oh, it taps for black or green. It's a mana dork. It's 2 colors, so Niv-Mizzet hits it. Okay, that makes sense. Like it's just a bunch of those things here.
Yes.
So I have nothing else to say. This deck is just such a unique, weird little beast that there's only so many suggestions we can offer up. But it was super fun to look at.
I do like the way that this deck is built. It's not your typical Niv-Mizzet.
Yes.
Most of them I've seen are either go into hardcore into the color combinations with like the most powerful of the cards, or they're a Planeswalker themed deck. Yep. And this one just went complete other way where it's just, different. And then when someone sits down and plays against it, they're going to be like, well, this was awesome to play against.
Yeah, like being able to die to a Niv-Mizzet that's wearing, Edge of Divinity, Riot Spikes, Runes of the Dews, and a Chromanticore. Like, oh, come on. That's like, you cannot complain when you die to that. That's just hilarious.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, hey, thank you very much to Kevin for sharing that deck with us. Kevin, thank you very much for supporting the show. Thanks to everybody out there for listening and for all the support you guys have given us over the years. Just thank you very much. This is the decks that our listeners send us are just routinely such a blast to look at. It could get so tiring doing deck techs constantly, but they're almost always interesting deck techs. That makes it so much easier for us too when we get to look at fun decks. So thanks to everybody out there. We will be back next Monday with a show. I believe we'll hopefully have all 3 of us back on again. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. The show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find them on Twitter at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Until next week, I'm Dana.
And I'm Chris.